It's 4 in the afternoon on Tuesday, August 26 here in Korea. Thanks for joining us. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. It's an all-stop situation at the National Assembly. The ruling party is not budging with the main opposition party in a sit-in rally. This as the bereaved families of April's ferry sinking wish to have more say in setting up the details of a probe into the accident. Connie Kim starts us off.
Members of the main opposition party are protesting outside the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae, joining dozens of members of bereaved families who have been camped out there since Friday. The protesters are calling on the ruling party to let the families of victims from April's ferry disaster take part in making decisions regarding a probe into the tragedy. The rival parties have been unable to come to terms on a special bill that would launch the investigation. In the morning, floor leader Park Young-sun read out a letter of support for the ferry victims' families.
We stand firmly against the groundless rumors aimed at the victims' families that are dividing the people.
Park called on the ruling Saenuri party to sit down with the families to resolve the matters of contention and on President Park Geun-hye to join them. The ruling Saenuri party lashed back at the opposition party, urging them to immediately return to the National Assembly. Amid the deadlock, all legislative proceedings have been suspended, including an annual parliamentary audit that was scheduled for this Tuesday. With the main opposition party planning to continue the protest until the government and the ruling party listen to the requests of the victims' families, President Park's economic and reform drives have come to a grinding halt. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
While the National Assembly is log-jammed over the ferry investigation, one person biting his nails is Finance Minister Cheong Wa Dae. A number of key bills aimed at boosting the nation's economy have been sitting on lawmakers' desks, and Che has urged them to get going. Son Jung-in reports.
Standing alongside key policymakers on Tuesday morning, Deputy Prime Minister Cheong Wa Dae sounded the alarm about the state of the Korean economy and called out lawmakers for their inability to pass a number of key bills aimed at reviving it.
The pulse of our economy is weakening. If those bills related to the livelihoods of the people do not pass during this session, and if we fail to stoke the embers of economic recovery, the economy could go off the tracks and we would face difficulties in turning it around.
While Che said he understands the importance of the so-called Seoul ferry bill, he also said that 9 economic bills which have been labeled as urgent need to be passed as soon as possible. Che also pointed out that at least 30 other pending bills need attention as well, all intended to stabilize people's livelihoods. The finance minister asked that lawmakers show leadership moving forward. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
In the meantime, the state-run financial regulator says it will lift more than 90% of its sanctions on financial institutions in a bid to stamp out protectionism in the sector. The Financial Services Commission adds this will help encourage the institutions to take more risks in giving out loans to startups and small to mid-sized companies. These plans were reported to President Park Geun-hye at her economic advisors meeting this morning. The FSC also talked about incentives for banks that financially support innovation and technology-based firms. On a separate note, the advisors also suggested a nationwide inspection of safety management as well. That's in light of the April ferry disaster. Officials plan to prevent disasters by having agents attend to dangers reported by the public through smart applications. Record downpours leading up to Monday have caused lives and done damage to Korea's southeastern Gyeongsang-namdo province. At least 12 people were killed and more are missing. Our Kim Hyun-bin has more.
In Changwon, southeast Korea, a city bus is swept away in flash floods caused by heavy rain. Caught in the fast-moving currents, the bus tips onto its side, and in an instant, it disappears, submerged under the rushing water. At least one person was killed in this incident. This is just one of the unfortunate effects of the record rain that drenched southeastern Korea on Monday, measuring up to 130 millimeters per hour. The territorial rains hit Korea's port city of Busan and nearby regions in Gyeongsang-namdo province, causing landslides, flooding cars and houses. and halting rail services and flights in and out of Kimhae Airport. Officials from the National Emergency Management say at least 12 people were killed and several others were left missing from the territorial rain and flash floods. On Tuesday morning, police continued to search for the missing, with fears the bodies could have been swept into the nearby ocean. For those confirmed dead, some drowned inside their cars that were stuck in a flooded underground road, while others were swept away by floodwaters. A 65-kilowatt nuclear power plant was also shut down after rain began to seep into a water intake facility. Within 3 hours, more than 240 millimeters of rain fell into Changwon, Busan, and other surrounding cities on Monday. Weather officials say showers are expected this week in the central and eastern parts of Korea, with the monsoon season lingering until mid-September. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea and the United States are reviewing the feasibility of holding a joint foreign and defense minister meeting in Washington in late October following an agreement reached during summit talks between the two nations in April. Officials say that should the meeting go ahead, both countries will discuss the timing of the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, as well as their combined operation capability against North Korea. Although the envisioned meeting would be around the time of the scheduled security consultative meeting in October, it will highly depend on the ministers' schedules. If the meeting does happen, it will mark only the third meeting of its type between the two nations. And amid the ongoing joint military drills between South Korea and the U.S., North Korea has upped its verbal attacks. Pyongyang's deputy ambassador to the UN says the regime might consider unleashing a powerful counterstrike. Our Shin Se-min has this story.
North Korea's deputy ambassador to the UN Lee Tong-il says Pyongyang is ready to enhance its countermeasures to the joint military drills between Seoul and Washington.
The DPRK is close to the use of nuclear weapons. They are to take nuclear preemptive strike with all different means of power, including nuclear weapons.
The North Korean envoy also expressed his frustration with the UN Security Council after it failed to acknowledge Pyongyang's request for an emergency meeting in response to the South Korea-US drills. The ambassador said the UN's inaction sends the wrong message to the international community, and the Security Council is encouraging the US to continue its provocative and dangerous joint military exercises against the North. The North Korean official also showed a slightly softer side.
In all these proposals are reflected the principled position of the DPRK on easing of the tension and bringing the national unity.
North Korea has been heavily critical of the joint South Korea-US exercises since they kicked off on August 18th. Earlier this month, Lee said the drills, which mobilized tens of thousands of South Korean and US troops, were the root cause of the prolonged tension on the Korean peninsula. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And staying on the topic, Russia's foreign minister has dismissed a speculation that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is planning to travel to Russia soon for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In a press briefing Monday, Minister Sergei Lavrov said the reports out of South Korea were categorically not true. This, as a media outlet in Seoul reported that Kim was planning a trip to Moscow in late August or early September, a visit aimed at countering Chinese President Xi Jinping, who came to Seoul last month before visiting Pyongyang. Korea's new ambassador to Japan, Woo Heung-soo, says the Japanese government must apologize for its historical wrongdoings before any summit talks can take place. The ambassador, however, says he will do what he can to improve the frosty ties. Our Kim Min-ji has this next story.
Korea's new ambassador to Japan says Seoul and Tokyo need summit talks, but only after Japan shows sincerity about its historical wrongdoings, including the sexual enslavement of Korean women. Speaking to reporters after his inauguration ceremony on Monday, Yoo Heung-soo, a four-term lawmaker, said talks need to take place in order to improve bilateral ties, a sentiment he believes is also shared by President Park Geun-hye. However, he added that before they are held, Japan must show some sort of action, especially regarding the sex slave issue, and when the summit is held, an outcome should be delivered. He said abnormal relations between the two countries, which have hit a low in recent months, should not continue, adding that he'll do all he can to better bilateral ties. Yu also highlighted the importance of security cooperation between the two amid continuous nuclear threats from North Korea. The ambassador also noted that next year should be a new starting point for Korea and Japan as they mark the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on Arirang.
U.S. President Barack Obama has approved air surveillance flights of Islamic State militants in Syria. This comes after the Syrian government said it was ready to work with the U.S. on countering the threat. Our Kwon So-ah has more.
U.S. military action against Islamic State militants in Syria is a possibility in the near future as President Barack Obama has authorized surveillance flights over militant targets in Syria. A senior U.S. official says Obama made the decision over the weekend, and according to defense officials on Monday, the Pentagon was preparing to dispatch manned and unmanned aircraft, including drones and spy planes. Earlier, Syria's foreign minister said his country welcomes any international help, including from the U.S., in fighting Islamic State militants.
We are ready to cooperate and coordinate with regional countries and the international community in fighting terrorism following the resolutions of the Security Council. We welcome everybody.
The offer was not unconditional, though. Mualim warned that any U.S. airstrikes must be coordinated with Damascus and that anything else would be considered an aggression. While the surveillance flights are for gathering intelligence on the Islamic State group, they could become precursors for an expansion of airstrikes in Syria, in addition to those that began in Iraq earlier this month. Also on Monday, the UN condemned crimes committed by IS militants in Iraq.
Such cold-blooded, systematic and intentional killing of civilians, after singling them out for their religious affiliation, may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The UN said there was substantial evidence of widespread rights violations such as targeted killings, abductions, sexual abuse, slavery, and the besieging of specific communities. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Turning now to the Ebola outbreak, Congo's health minister says as many as 15 people may have died so far in the country's latest bout with the virus. Ebola had first been identified in Congo in 1976, and this would be the 7th time the country is dealing with an outbreak. The minister said tests have identified a different strain of the virus from the Zaire strain in West Africa. He added the Djira region where those 15 fatalities were recorded, that's about some 1,200 kilometers from the capital, that area would be placed under quarantine. Now, meanwhile, back in Liberia, a doctor who had received the experimental drug ZMapp died late Sunday. In the U.S. stock market, the S&P 500 index topped the 2,000 mark for the first time on Monday and ended at a closing record of 1,997, up 9 points or 0.5% from the previous trading day. Analysts say although it was only for a short while, reaching the milestone is an impressive accomplishment given that the index had tumbled to below 700 in early 2009. Each of the 10 primary sectors on the S&P advanced on Monday despite cautious signals from the reduction in stimulus from the Federal Reserve and a simmering conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Now back here in Korea, daily trading volume on the Korean bourse rose to an average of 6.4 trillion won. That's about $6.3 billion this month, up about 40% from the end of last year. That's according to the Korea Exchange. Now, individual share investors' deposits at brokerage houses also surged by about $2 billion during that period. The rise in turnover was due partly to U.S. investors who increased their holding in Korean shares by about $1.4 billion last month. The benchmark Kospi index closed at 2,068 on Tuesday, up from 2,011 recorded on the last trading day of 2013. Now, almost 1 in every 4 households in Korea is finding it impossible to make ends meet. That's according to Statistics Korea. The ratio of households with 2 or more people whose spending exceeds their disposable income reached 23% in the second quarter, up 0.9 percentage points from the same period last year. The agency says the rise came as the growth of disposable income failed to catch up with consumption spending. Korea's corporate culture is set up much like Korean society, which is heavily influenced by Confucianism. Employees are used to taking orders from above without questioning and are often frowned upon for expressing new ideas. But IT companies here in the nation are apparently taking steps to change that culture to promote creativity. Yoo Rian reports.
Korean IT companies are creating a more casual work environment to promote creativity. Daum Communications, which is set to merge with Korea's largest messenger application company, Kakao Corporation, says it will have its 1,600 workers refer to each other with English names by October. It's intended to eliminate the hierarchy that's standard in Korean culture, where employees are socially obligated to address each other by their position and seniority instead of by their first names like in the West. Daum believes the change will allow young staffers to more freely express themselves and enhance communication and cooperation in the process. Naver Corporation took a step in the same direction recently when it said that its employees will stop referring to each other by their positions and use Mr. or Mrs. along with their Korean names instead. Could the seemingly minor changes bring about real changes to Korea's innovation potential? A recent innovation index ranked Korea 16th out of 77 countries, higher than Japan or China. But when it came to the so-called tolerance index, which measures how much a society tolerates different values and thoughts, Korea was ranked near the bottom at 62. With Korea's rigid and hierarchical corporate culture being blamed for stifling creativity, the IT companies are trying to break it down, one English name at a time. Yoo Rian, Arirang News.
Now for today's In the Spotlight, we have a special guest with us in the studio. Joining us is the head director of the United Nations World Food Program Office in Rwanda, Mr. Jean-Pierre de Margerie. Thank you very much, sir, for being here today. So please do tell us about the Semaul Zero Hunger Communities project currently ongoing in Rwanda.
Well, it's an exciting project. It's a new project that started 2.5 years ago. With the support of KOICA and the government of Korea. So it's a project that looks at helping very poor communities in Rwanda fight poverty, fight hunger, and try to address their problem of food insecurity.
Mm-hmm. And the word Semaul, I'm sure if for the people in Korea, they're used to the word Semaul, but people in Rwanda are probably not.
They're not. They're familiar with the type of community work we used to do before with them at World Food Program. But recently we've come in partnership with KOICA and with the government of Korea in merging the spirit of Samulundong to what we used to do. And it's yielding some very impressive benefits up to now for these very poor communities.
So what are some of the examples of those achievements so far?
Rwanda, for example, is a very hilly country, a bit like Korea is. And in areas where they didn't used to produce anything out of them because of the terrain was too hilly, we managed to build these radical terraces. And we increased by basically 100% agricultural yields on these areas. So now these poor families who used to produce just enough to feed themselves, now they manage to meet their own needs, but in addition to that, they're able to sell their surpluses on the market. So for the first time, they have some cash income. So the quality of their lifestyle has increased dramatically. So that's just one component. We're building different type of infrastructure assets in the community to look at really helping them, pulling themselves out of poverty.
What kind of support then do you expect from South Korea?
Well, first of all, it was the model per se, Samulundong. So that's a model that has proven itself obviously here in Korea in the 70s and 80s. And because of its universal values, principles, and concept, this can be exportable to the developing world. So we've realized this at the World Food Program, and now we're using Samulundong in 4 countries, among them Rwanda. So it's a kind of synergy of like minds where KOICA's success stories are being merged with WFP's experience in the field, and it's proving to be quite successful up to now.
But there must have been some challenges, though. I mean, 새마을운동 is from Korea, and the culture of Korea is different from that in Rwanda.
Yeah, absolutely. But you look at the context of Korea in the 1970s, where the country was still quite poor.
Struggling.
And then you can draw these parallels with what you can see in the developing world and in Africa and in Rwanda. So you can draw these parallels between level of developments. But like I said earlier, you do have these kind of universal principles that can be used even in Africa. For example, at the time we were talking about the importance of collaboration, the importance of being quite diligent in the management of these projects, the importance of becoming self-reliant and self-help. These are still values today which are quite applicable to contexts like in Rwanda. And by applying them, now we're seeing results. So yes, it needs to be obviously adapted to the national context, but if you're smart about contextualizing your program and your approach and involving the communities from the very onset, it works.
Well, how can ordinary or general public show support in supporting and funding the program?
I think there's ways of supporting. It's a good question. Normally, WFP works mainly with government in terms of its funding. We do also do private fundraising with companies. But there are also opportunities if you go on the WFP website for individual to contribute and support.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and making the time to come to the studio and talk to us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Now, as you can see, it's looking very cloudy all across the nation, and unfortunately more rain is in the forecast. And it's currently raining in the east coastal region, and that will expand to other regions, including Seoul, where up to 40 millimeters are expected, and the surrounding regions of Gyeongsangnam, the province, which can expect up to 60. And until then, we can expect mostly cloudy skies nationwide with strong sunshine and high UV levels. And also, it seems like the temperatures will remain very similar to yesterday's, ranging between the low 20s to the low 30s. Now going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out at 30 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will top to 29 and 27 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 28, while Dokdo and Mankungang both tops to 22. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Hyun-kyung.
All right, thank you, Michelle, for that. That's all we have for you now. Our next newscast is at 6 p.m. Korea time. I'll see you then.